smell the jet fuel. You could smell the hydraulic fluid. You could smell death.
We're going to scour this swamp quadrant by quadrant.
NTSB investigators face an unprecedented challenge.
My first thought is, how am I going to pull this off?
It's up to Greg Fife and his team to figure out why ValuJet Flight 592 erupted in flames.
Fire!
Just minutes after takeoff.
Okay, let's start it up.
We had a raging fire.
We almost destroyed their test facility.
The Secretary of Transportation lost his job. The administrator of the FAA lost his job because of this one accident.
City on fire!
Mayday, Mayday.
It has been 6 months since Florida's worst aviation disaster.
ValuJet forced many people in this agency to ask some very tough questions.
Federal hearings into the fiery crash of ValuJet Flight 592 are filled with controversy and recrimination.
I'm the mother of the captain of ValuJet 592, Captain Candlin Chamberlain Kubek, and I am very angry.
This was one of these historic cases that had a tremendous amount of public attention and public concern.
I have always thought this crash was very preventable and very senseless.
ValuJet 592 fell out of the sky because of a complete breakdown of the system.
The Federal Aviation Administration is under attack for failing to implement safety recommendations made 8 years ago after another onboard fire. In 1988, an American Airlines crew managed to land their burning DC-9 and save the lives of all 120 passengers.
The Federal Aviation Administration required fire and smoke detection and/or fire extinguishment systems as the Safety Board recommended in 1988. ValuJet Flight 592 would not have crashed.
The 105 passengers that were put in danger by that bureaucratic failure
11A and B.
boarded a ValuJet DC-9 on the morning of May 11th, 1996. Flight 592 is a short 1.5-hour trip from Miami to Atlanta, Georgia.
Let me help you with that.
ValuJet was one of the first low-cost carriers. People, instead of driving, they were getting on this low-fare blue and white airplane with the cartoon character.
There's some little hairdrops in here, too.
It's the crew's second flight of the day on this plane. Commanding Flight 592 is 35-year-old Candlin Kubek. Captain Kubek is an experienced pilot with nearly 9,000 flight hours.
Okay.
The first officer is a former Air Force pilot, 52-year-old Richard Hazen.
Clear to start?
Received.
Shoulder harness.
On.
Parking brakes.
On.
Today's flight is loaded with almost 2,000 kilograms of cargo, which includes passenger luggage, ValuJet company material, and U.S. mail. The crew must sign off on all cargo loaded on board. With the paperwork complete,
Here you go.
they prepare to taxi to the runway.
Crater 592. Taxi to runway 9 or left.
A 9 left, Critter 592.
The DC-9 is 27 years old. It has more than 68,000 hours of flight time. On the flight into Miami from Atlanta that day, the autopilot wasn't working, and the PA system was broken.
Want to test out the PA and talk to the people?
Ladies and gentlemen, from the cockpit, we are in a hole right now for crossing traffic on the ground.
Mechanics in Miami were able to fix the PA.
It works. We can hear you loud and clear.
Crater 592. Runway 9 left. Cleared for takeoff.
But repairs to the autopilot will have to wait.
Set takeoff power.
Once the DC-9 is back at airline headquarters in Atlanta,
Power is set.
Mechanics there will work on the problem.
Rotate.
The sky was relatively benign that Mayday, and they were just looking forward to getting home.
Positive rates.
There was no portent at all about that flight.
Gear up.
Without the autopilot, the pilots will manually fly the aircraft for the return flight. It's an inconvenience, but not all that unusual, nor unsafe.
What was that? We got some electrical problem.
Yeah, the battery charge is kicking in.
The plane's batteries are draining fast. Captain Kubek worries she could lose power to her instrument panel and other key flight systems.
We're losing everything.
Just 6 minutes after takeoff, the crew is facing a barrage of failures.
Critter 592, contact Miami Center on 132.45. So long.
Controllers in Miami believe Flight 592 is safely on its way to Atlanta. But in the cockpit, Captain Kubek decides to turn around.
We need to go back to Miami.
It's suddenly clear why their systems are failing. Flames are burning through the cabin floor.
.592 needs immediate return to Miami.
Kubek has to get the burning plane on the ground as quickly as possible.
You can only shed altitude so fast. You point it down much more than 5 or 6 degrees, and all of a sudden you can become in an overspeed situation. You can stress the aircraft, and you don't want to do that.
Roger, Critter 592. Turn left heading
270. Descend and maintain 7,000 feet.
What kind of problem are you having?
Fire!
Smoke in the cabin.
Okay, roger that.
First officer is handling the communication. The captain is handling the airplane. They want to try to get on the ground. They're working in a coordinated fashion. Classic cockpit resource management. Nobody is panicking. Nobody is throwing in the towel.
What altitude?
7,000.
Captain Kubek throttles back in an attempt to descend, but the left engine doesn't respond. It stays at climb power. As the right engine slows, the plane banks to the right. She discovers her ailerons still have life and manages to stabilize the plane.
That was a good crew up in the nose of that airplane.
Passengers are in a desperate fight for survival, but there's no escaping the onboard flames, which are burning at over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Toxic smoke is filling the entire cabin.
This is heavy, poisonous smoke. People are breathing it in.
When a fire's on board, there's a real sense of helplessness. There's a limited number of things you can do.
Take short breaths.
Less than 10,000 feet above southern Florida, Captain Kubek has the plane in a tight turn back to the airport.
Completely on fire.
The crew of Flight 592 has only seconds to get the burning DC-9 onto a runway before all is lost.
Critter 592. We need the closest airport available.
Critter 592.
They're going to be standing by for you.
Emergency crews in Miami prepare for the landing.
The airplane starts losing altitude progressively. The airplane is out of control.
The first officer's request for an alternate airport are the last words controllers hear from the crew. The DC-9 plummets toward the ground at over 700 kilometers per hour. Flight 592 has crashed into one of the most inhospitable spots on Earth, the Florida Everglades.
A large jet aircraft has just crashed out here. Large, like airliner size. Maybe get your choppers in the air?
The Everglades covers much of the southern tip of Florida. Hundreds of square kilometers of shallow swamp, mangroves, and watery grassland. Just getting to the crash site will be a huge challenge for rescuers. Miami-Dade police helicopters find the wreckage of ValuJet Flight 592 in swampland, far from the nearest highway.
Federal safety officials say it's the most difficult recovery operation they've ever faced, with wreckage strewn like confetti in a muddy, alligator-infested swamp that can only be reached by helicopter or airboat.
The very waterous, marshy area, and that's proving difficult to reach people that may have survived this crash.
Rescuers know that the first hours of this rescue operation are critical. In 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Everglades, 6 kilometers from the ValuJet crash site. Several passengers drowned before rescuers could reach them.
Yeah, to be in the Everglades after the crash, it was utter devastation, destruction. The smell, you could smell the jet fuel. You could smell the hydraulic fluid. You could smell death.
Most of the aircraft has sunk beneath the surface of the swamp.
The wreckage was in the Everglades. It's a hostile environment. It wasn't clear at that point how much we'd be able to learn from the wreckage or be able to recover.
We suited up as best as possible. We first put on that Tyvek suit, and then we put on an extra sleeve, put 2 surgical gloves on, put a pair of work gloves on, and then they duct taped the work gloves to the Tyvek suit.
The heavy gear protects rescuers from spilled fuel and other toxins. But below the surface of the swamp lurks an even deadlier threat.
They had to have a sharpshooter on top of the airboat at all times.
The crash site is a nesting ground for alligators.
As the divers were walking in the water, if somebody sighted an alligator or you'd hear them hiss in the sawgrass, they would take potshots to try and scare them away.
Just hours after the crash, officials come to a grim conclusion.
It doesn't look good that there are any survivors.
All 105 passengers on board Flight 592 are dead. Captain Kubek, First Officer Richard Hazen, and 3 flight attendants are also dead.
I feel that it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to identify everybody.
There was no evidence of the airplane. There was just debris. Very little present, no evidence of passengers.
You had to put it out of your mind what actually you were doing. You could not think of what it was that you were picking up. If you did, you would be useless, and you wouldn't be able to do the job.
My initial reaction in a situation like that is it's anger. It's not again, it's how can this happen, it's what happened, why.
The morning after the crash, NTSB investigators join local and federal police agents at the site. They know the pilots of Flight 592 reported smoke in the cabin. Now they need to find out what caused it.
All right, let's get to work.
The team is led by veteran investigator Greg Feith.
You got to step back, take a deep breath, and then start to prioritize. Okay, what do I have to do now? And then utilize the resources to make that happen. It's showtime. Here we go.
I'll let Greg answer that, but there's actually no way to tell if the pilots were conscious or unconscious at the time of impact.
My first thought is, how am I going to pull this off?
Feith faces intense pressure to come up with answers, and quickly.
I'm determined to do everything I can to make sure that American aviation is the safest in the world.
The NTSB briefs the many volunteers who've come to help recover the wreckage.
Need your eyes. We've drawn up a grid. We're going to scour this swamp quadrant by quadrant.
Everybody's looking to me for the answers because I am in charge of the investigation. What are we going to do? What do you want us to do? Where do you want us to go?
The first priority is to find the aircraft's 2 black boxes.
This is what we're looking for. This here is the data recorder. And this here is the voice recorder. You find one, you'll probably find the other one close by.
From the CVR, investigators hope to hear the last sounds in the cockpit, pilot conversation,
We need to go back to Miami.
and any alarms that might help identify where the smoke originated. The flight data recorder should reveal how a fire might have spread. through the sequence of failures it likely caused. Each box holds clues that could help investigators uncover the precise cause of the crash.
And if you find one, cold beer's on me.
The black boxes emit a constant radio signal. Searchers will use a sonar scanner to pick up that signal.
How soon can we get out there with the sonar? Sonar's on its way.
They'll be able to pick up those pingers that hopefully identify where, in fact, those boxes lie in the wreckage.
But Navy technicians soon find that their sophisticated gear is no match for the Everglades.
Side-scan sonar didn't work because the sawgrass is so dense it can't see through the sawgrass. What really worked for us was going back to the basics. We had a line of what we called divers that had to walk basically shoulder length apart, and we would cover specific areas, probing till we hit something hard. It ended up being human power that really helped us recover better than 75% of the aircraft.
As the Everglades search continues, investigators in Miami dig through Flight 592's records, looking for clues as to what might have caused a fire. They soon learn that the flight was delayed earlier in the day due to minor electrical problems. The find raises concern that an electrical fire brought down the plane.
We were looking at any explanation. There could have been a fault in the wiring or a short circuit, and we realized it was going to be a very difficult investigation.
Recovery teams continue to battle intense heat.
Florida, in May, 90 degrees, 95% humidity. We had to worry about how long can you be in that heat?
You're trudging through in your waders, and you're stepping on stuff. You have to bend down and you have to pick it up and see what it is.
There were times where, you think you're picking up a wire bundle, and it was a snake. You're picking up the back end of a snake. So it was all of those things that made this probably one of the most challenging environments for an accident investigation to be conducted.
NTSB fire investigator Merritt Berkey studies masses of tangled wiring from the crash site.
I was sent down there to determine the cause of that in-flight fire.
When faulty wiring sparks a fire, electrical arcing causes the wires to burn and melt.
When we recovered more of the electrical harness on the plane, we saw some damage there, but it wasn't evidence of electrical arcing on the wires. It was all external damage to the insulation.
The careful examination rules out faulty wiring as a potential cause of the fire. Another challenge. The Everglades is not a stagnant swamp. It has a current that flows out to sea.
One of the unique things about the Florida Everglades is that it's water, and it's constantly in motion.
That current makes the job of tracking down aircraft debris even harder. 2 days into the investigation, Fife finally catches a break.
Oh, hot damn. We found ourselves a box.
It was sitting on the bottom in the mud, partially submerged under about 3 to 4 feet of water.
One of the Metro-Dade Police Fire Rescue folks was walking their grid and actually stepped on one of the orange boxes. The whole accident site, all of the investigators, everybody comes to a halt as soon as the word spreads that we think we got a recorder.
Officials wasted no time bringing it out of the swamp into a police car and onto a plane for Washington.
The aging DC-9 was equipped with a primitive FDR. It recorded only 11 flight parameters, compared to the hundreds recorded by modern units. But the next morning, when Fife studies the preliminary results from Washington, he finds a clue that may point to the origin of the fire.
Dive 800 feet and back in 3 seconds. It's impossible.
The FDR recorded a sudden increase in air pressure.
What we found on the flight data recorder that records the parameter of the static pressure was that there was a bump. It spiked briefly and then went back to a nominal value.
Sensors on the fuselage measure outside air pressure. Normally, the pressure decreases with altitude. But as Flight 592 was climbing, the pressure briefly went up, not down. A DC-9 cannot dive and climb that quickly. The numbers don't make sense.
Look at this.
We really didn't know. we theorized about a variety of different things.
Could have been an explosion on board.
A shockwave moving outward from inside the aircraft can cause a sudden spike in external pressure.
And of course, you start thinking, an explosion could do that. So do we have a bomb?
With an onboard explosion a real possibility, Merritt Berkey examines the wreckage to see if he can figure out where the fire originated.
So we had a lot of parts coming in that were damaged, almost all limited to the cargo compartment. We had melted structure components that were in the overhead of the cargo compartment, which made up the floor of the passenger compartment. And then we also had some seat tracks for the passengers that were burned and melted. We determined that the fire was very intense up in the upper area of the cargo compartment on the left side.
Berkey makes an unusual discovery. It's stainless steel.
You don't normally see burned stainless steel in a flight fire.
Planes are made of lightweight material, like aluminum and titanium, not stainless steel. The burned metal raises a question. Just what kind of cargo was on board the plane? Investigator Malcolm Brenner needs to know exactly what type of cargo ValuJet 592 was carrying.
The operations group more and more became concerned about the cargo that was loaded on the airplane and what possible significance it could have to the accident.
The cargo documentation lists 3 airplane tires and 5 boxes of empty oxygen canisters.
The operations group found that the manifest, which indicated that there were oxygen canisters, empty oxygen canisters in the cargo signed for by the first officer. When Greg Feith was available, I briefed him.
Okay, company material, 3 aircraft tires, and 5 boxes of parts.
Malcolm is a pilot. He has an understanding of aviation. He's a smart guy.
The contents of the cardboard boxes confuse me. 144 empty oxygen canisters.
Wait, how many of them?
144.
An oxygen canister is a green bottle, very large bottle, that supplies oxygen to the flight crew and the passengers.
There's no way, Malcolm. You can't fit that many on the plane.
We all took a pause and said, why would you be carrying 144 of these big green oxygen cylinders? Malcolm asked a very innocent question.
What exactly do you think they mean by oxygen canister?
And that's really what triggered the investigators to step back and say, we need to verify exactly what was meant.
At the crash site, the recovery work continues. The debris includes dozens of small metal cylinders, parts not from the DC-9. Investigators now understand what was in the boxes listed on the cargo manifest.
We found out that it was not a canister, but in fact an oxygen generator.
Oxygen generators are small devices installed above the passenger seats of certain airplanes. They're connected to oxygen masks that drop down in the event of cabin depressurization. Pulling down on the mask yanks a lanyard, which slides out a retaining pin. That triggers a chemical reaction that generates breathable oxygen.
The masks are attached to nipples on this oxygen generator. That's the supplemental oxygen that flows through the tube to the mask.
Investigators wonder whether the oxygen generators that were being carried in the cargo hold could have caused the fire.
We had 5 boxes of these, or 144 of them, thrown in a box, carried as cargo. We had to look at, well, if they're carrying these and they're supposedly empty, what danger is there carrying them as cargo?
It's no question. They're clearly listed as empty.
Did they have a potential for creating a fire or a fire situation that could have jeopardized the safety of this aircraft?
As recovery teams continue to pull oxygen generators from the bottom of the Everglades, they find that while some are in fact empty,
this has never even been triggered.
Many others are full.
The oxygen generators that we had found had been damaged. Some were completely flattened, some of them were charred and crushed, some of them still had the material in them, but the case had been dented and damaged.
It's the temperature of the canisters after they've been triggered that concerns investigators.
These things get pretty hot, Greg. Really hot.
They can reach 260 degrees Celsius. That's why in the cabin, they're stored behind a heat-resistant shield.
An oxygen generator that is not mounted in its proper position in a heat sink cradle in the passenger service unit is lethal. Because if it's anywhere near a combustible material, you're going to have a fire.
It now seems highly volatile chemicals were improperly shipped aboard Flight 592. Had the pilots known what was actually on board, they likely would not have signed off on the manifest. They and their 105 passengers would still be alive. Four days after the crash of Flight 592, hazardous materials specialist Jim Henderson joins the team.
Initial documentation that we were looking for was the records of where the chemical oxygen generators had come from, how they got on the airplane.
Henderson reviews the history of the ValuJet fleet.
We found out that ValuJet had recently purchased 3 airplanes from other carriers.
Well, I think I know where they came from.
ValuJet's work order on these airplanes basically were to open the plane up, find out what the dates were on the generators.
Oxygen generators have a shelf life. To meet federal safety standards, any out-of-date generators on the recently purchased planes needed to be replaced. That job was given to a company called Sabertech.
We spoke to the maintenance personnel primarily to find out how these were handled. The chemical oxygen generators had been removed from an airplane. We wanted to make sure that they were handled in accordance with their work cards.
Henderson learns that Sabertech removed 144 oxygen generators. Most of them were out of date, but still full. There are strict guidelines regulating how oxygen generators are to be removed and shipped safely.
The work orders basically described how to take them off the aircraft and how to replace the new generators on the aircraft. Once removed from the aircraft, one of the safety precautions is to replace the safety cap that keeps it from accidentally activating.
It says we should put shipping caps on them. Do we have any?
Many of the mechanics realized how dangerous they were. The mechanics recognized the need for safety caps. Several mechanics told us in interviews that they had advised their supervisors of the need for safety caps.
They look like this. Did you see any? No, they didn't have any. And you can't take them off the new ones.
Henderson learns that since they didn't have protective caps, Sabertech mechanics improvised.
The maintenance people didn't have the safety caps. One of the other things that was mentioned on the work order was that they take the lanyards and wrap them around the oxygen generator. There were several others who felt that the lanyards were unnecessary, so they actually physically cut the lanyards off, leaving the pins basically free inside of the generator.
Do you put any labels on the actual generators?
After I pulled them out, I put a green tag on them.
On the tags, Sabertech workers wrote the word expired. What investigators still don't know is how the 144 oxygen generators ended up on a passenger plane weeks later. When investigators interviewed Sabertech shipping staff, they learned that the generator sat in a hangar for weeks.
Sabertech had a new customer coming in, and they wanted to clean up the area for the new customer to give them a good impression of their company. As far as they were concerned, they were ValuJet's material, and therefore they were to be returned to ValuJet.
Investigators discovered that the potentially dangerous generators were on Flight 592 due to a misunderstanding over a single word: expired.
Did someone actually think that expired meant empty?
The shipping papers described the oxygen generators as oxy, or XY for oxygen, canisters, and then the word empty. This was a big problem because these oxygen generators weren't empty. They had expired, but expiration just meant that they had exceeded their shelf life. The use of the term empty was an error on his part. However, the shipping clerk himself wasn't that familiar with the oxygen generators. They were still capable of generating oxygen. They hadn't been properly safed. They hadn't been properly packaged. So we were really concerned that this might be either what caused the accident or what made the fire worse.
On May 11th, 1996, airport workers loaded potentially flammable cargo onto ValuJet 592. However, the DC-9's cargo hold is specifically designed to contain a fire.
Regulations required that the cargo hold be airtight. If, in fact, you do have a fire in that cargo hold, it'll burn itself out because it's airtight.
But would a cargo fire burn out if the cargo itself produced oxygen?
We knew about the oxygen generators. We knew the potential they had for being a fire source, but we didn't really know, in the grand scheme of things, their real potential for bringing down an aircraft.
At an FAA fire test facility,
Okay, let's do this.
they hope to recreate the fire that consumed Flight 592.
1 minute to ignition.
We had to trigger one of the oxygen generators manually.
Nothing at all.
We didn't really get much of a fire.
An activated oxygen generator isn't enough to set fire to the cardboard box it's packed in.
So how did these things start a fire?
NTSB investigators are back at square one. They can't prove their theory.
What were these things packed in?
The failure of the fire test prompts investigators to look more closely at exactly how the oxygen generators were packaged for transport.
The first test we did, we had not packed them exactly the way they were packed.
You layer of bubble wrap.
We did not use bubble wrap in the first test. That is, put bubble wrap over the top of the generators before we closed the box. We put 5 boxes of oxygen generators, put them on top of a tire, and put some luggage around them.
Okay, let's start it up.
It made an unbelievable noise. It was a high-pitched scream. We all looked at each other. We were kind of startled. I mean, the sound was deafening.
Ten minutes after ignition, the ceiling of the test cargo container reaches 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Lord almighty. We almost destroyed their test facility.
After 11 minutes, it exceeds the capacity of the monitoring equipment.
All right, let's get that fire out.
We had a raging fire, and none of us had expected a fire to be that big and that hot. And it was just amazing to see how disastrous, how destructive something this long and that big around could be.
The experiment supports the NTSB theory. Improperly packaged oxygen generators caused the crash of ValuJet 592. Even in an airtight cargo hold, the fire would have burned fiercely enough to bring down the DC-9.
The problem with Flight 592 is that you defeat the intended purpose of the Class D cargo hold, because even though the hold may be airtight, you've got 144 sources of oxygen in that airtight container.
Investigators now suspect that the accidental activation of a generator during loading or on takeoff is all that it took to trigger a disaster that claimed 110 lives. with the help of the plane's flight recorders.
Oxygen generators are loaded sometime after 1300.
Investigators are able to reconstruct the final moments of ValuJet 592.
There was a muffled bump or thump that had come off the cockpit voice recorder, which prompted the captain to ask,
What was that?
that muffled noise, that thump, when you marry that information up to the flight data recorder, it happened at the same time that we saw the bump in the static pressure.
The sound recorded on the CDR is the tire exploding. The same explosion picked up by the flight data recorder.
What kind of problem are you having?
Fire!
Smoke in the cabin. It's been 30 seconds since the explosion. Hazen requests a return to Miami.
592 needs immediate return to Miami.
We can hear a lot of background noises. We have a flight attendant coming up front. She's talking about how bad the fire is, and the last part of it is silent.
And then nothing.
There is no crew interaction. There is no talking. There is no verbal communication. All you hear is the sound of the wind. It indicated to us that whatever was happening was fast, incapacitated the flight crew to the point where they were unconscious.
It only took 3 minutes and 42 seconds for the fire to bring down the plane.
There was no chance of getting the plane to the ground safely. In the wake of the accident, the FAA grounds ValuJet indefinitely. The National Transportation Safety Board recommends better training for employees who handle oxygen generators.
There weren't any bad guys with black hats. They were all people just trying to get by, doing the best they could.
The NTSB also renews its call from 8 years earlier to have smoke detectors and fire extinguishers installed in the cargo holds of all passenger jets.
FAA turned around after ValuJet crashed and mandated fire suppression and fire alerting systems. But they should have done that a long time ago.
An inferno, what a hell those people went through.
And our loved ones are dead because this agency has not done its job.
It's classic tombstone regulation. You build a body count, and that body count is the only thing that sways people to go out and do anything.
The Secretary of Transportation lost his job. The administrator of the FAA lost his job because of this one accident.
It was a very important lesson, and it's unfortunate that it comes about with this kind of cost, but this was a case that did make major changes in the industry, that we all worked together to make sure this doesn't happen again.